Welcome back to part 2. In the last module in this video, in the last video in this module, and this is the second of 2, we talked about the FEMA model and your choice about how to label your affective states, moods, emotions, or feelings, thought feelings, depending on how you want to proceed with the situation. And that phase of labeling your affective states according to type, intensity, and name is part of what we'll discuss in this video as emotional management or emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence, which is sometimes called your EQ, so as opposed to your IQ, which is your intellectual quotient, your emotional quotient, your emotional intelligence is your EQ, and sometimes it's called EI, and sometimes it's called EIQ. So emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is the ability to interpret your emotions, which we know means many things, strategically. And in the actual definition of emotional management, the word is accurately, but emotions aren't really a matter of accuracy. They're a matter of effective choices. So I say the ability to interpret emotions strategically. And then to use that information to manage your emotions, communicate them competently, and solve relationship problems. So people with high emotional intelligence tend to have 4 skills. So these are sort of my version of the 4 basic skills of emotional intelligence. 1, they have an acute or strong understanding of their own affect, emotions, feelings, and moods. And that means the ability to recognize affective states and describe them neutrally, to label those affective states strategically and intentionally for a purpose, and then awareness of what the particular labels mean. So thought cues, needs, physical effects. So I know when I feel XYZ, I'm going to interpret that as boredom. And when that happens, these are the things I'm going to respond with, and these are how I'm going to manage it. So the acute understanding of your own emotions, which includes affect, emotions, thought, feelings, and moods. Okay. 2, the ability to have a sense of others, so an understanding of others' emotions, what we usually call empathy, the ability to see things from others' perspectives and to have a sense of compassion regarding how they're perceiving a situation. So something that may not upset you may upset someone else, and then your just ability to kind of be okay with the fact that something is upsetting to someone else that's not upsetting to you. So number 1 is the acute, nuanced understanding of your own emotions, emotion being the general term we use for FEMA. And then 2, understanding in a nuanced way the emotions of others. Number 3 is an aptitude or talent for constructively managing your own emotions, labeling, choosing which states you want to experience, that kind of stuff. So managing your own emotions is step 3. And then step 4 is emotional problem solving. So the capacity for harnessing your emotional state in ways that create competent decision making, communication, and relationship problem solving. So understanding your own emotions, understanding others' emotions, managing your own emotions, and emotional problem solving. You will notice that one of the phases is not managing others' emotions, right? You understand your own, you understand theirs, you manage yours, but you're not responsible for managing other people's emotions. So nowhere are you considered emotionally intelligent or not. If you are operating under the illusion you can manage other people's emotions, the only person who can manage their emotion is the person experiencing the emotion, right? So that's not part of the deal. Given that emotional intelligence involves understanding emotions coupled with the ability to manage them in ways that optimize your interpersonal communication competence, it's not surprising that people with high emotional intelligence experience a broad range of positive outcomes. So the reason I'm telling you this is because I think we have a bad habit in our culture specifically of kind of assuming that emotions are this thing that we just kind of don't want. So we don't want emotions in the workplace, or we don't want we don't want you to be too emotional in a relationship. But you're always emotional. I'm emotional right now. We're emotional in class. You're emotional at work. Emotion doesn't mean dramatic. It doesn't mean crying. It doesn't mean acting out. It doesn't mean anger, right? Those are very intense, acute emotions. But there's all kinds of ways that your thought, feelings, and your moods and your affective states and your emotions enter into your daily life. So you're always managing emotions. It's just you're more comfortable and recognize certain emotions as safe and appropriate and not others, but all of them are perfectly legitimate. I mean, should you laugh out hysterically in the middle of a funeral? It depends. I mean, maybe that's the choice you've made. You might get judged for it, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong choice. It depends. So the only reason I'm telling you this is because if you have a resistance to emotional intelligence as a skill that you wish to acquire. Perhaps knowing the positive benefits that people experience from having good emotional intelligence will make you more inclined toward learning to manage your emotions instead of being a person who just says, well, I just don't get emotional, which is not true. You get certain types of emotional that you recognize as rational, but that's just your interpretation. So within leadership positions, people with high emotional intelligence are more likely than low emotional intelligence people to get trust, to inspire followers, and be perceived as having integrity. High emotionally intelligent individuals are less likely than low EQ people to bully people or use violence, right? So that's another reason if you tend to be sort of a little bit coercive or a little bit of a bully, emotional intelligence might be something you could develop that would curb that. People with high EQ find it easier to forgive relational partners who have wronged them because of their strong empathy and skill at emotion management. So they tend to experience less dramatic relationships that aren't as jealous, as stressful. High emotionally intelligent people have the ability to harness the power of positive emotions, savoring positive emotions rather than dampening them, thus benefiting in their overall life satisfaction. So what we're talking about here is we're not talking about like feel positive emotions all the time. High emotional intelligence also means that you are very well adjusted and very accepting of the fact that a lot of the time you are just going to experience low-level emotional states in your life. Boredom, disappointment, uncertainty, restlessness, indeterminacy. That's a lot of your life, and people with high emotional intelligence don't try to just make everything positive. That would be not effective. They're also good at sitting with non-positive emotions, but when they have positive emotions or positive experiences, they do try to really garner that stuff, right? They try to work it up, they try to remember it, they try to make sense of it, as opposed to people with low emotional intelligence who very often will have a positive experience, but they won't work to try to hold on to it, to try to concretize it, to try to put it into memory. So there's a journaling activity that sometimes I'll recommend to people if they tend to have a really hard time thinking of positive thoughts. It's a journal, and at the top you're supposed to list 3 things that you're grateful for. And that's like, but lots of people do that, right? That's the gratitude practice. But the other thing you do is you really take detail and retell yourself the story of a positive experience for the day, because you have to actually train your brain to look for positive stuff. Because if you've spent your whole life looking for negative stuff, you're really gonna have to work at looking for positive stuff. And again, that doesn't mean you're always positive. It just means that you work hard to try to bring more positivity and recognize and value positivity when it happens instead of just dismissing it. Doesn't mean you're just always positive. All right. And you'll notice when you learn the I statement model, right, the three ideal statements of the I statement model in the next reading that goes with this unit, you'll notice that all of the steps involved in the I statement model all display the 4 principles of emotional intelligence when they're done right. Okay. So that's emotional intelligence, and a key component of emotional intelligence is using the FEMA model, and another key component is managing emotions after they've occurred. So for example, let's suppose that the FEMA model flies on by you and suddenly you just find yourself sad, or you find yourself excited, or you find yourself angry, and you got there kind of fast and you didn't have time to sort of reframe it in the beginning. You're already there. So one strategy for managing emotions is to try to modify or control them after you become aware that they've happened. An event triggers arousal, you interpret the event, you become aware of an emotion, you display the emotion, right? You experience the heightened intensity of the emotion. And then you might consciously try to modify your internal experience and outward communication of that emotion. And the 2 most common ways people manage emotion after they have been triggered are suppression and venting. Spoiler alert, these are both going to turn out not to be super ideal, but they happen a lot, so we want to know what they are and have names for them so we can recognize them. But ultimately, these are not going to be 2 strategies you want to hold on to. So suppression involves inhibiting thoughts, arousal, and outward behavioral displays of emotion, basically dampening, right? So trying to keep yourself from expressing it, talking yourself down, white knuckling and telling yourself it's not okay to feel this way. The desire to suppress stems from the recognition that a feeling or an emotion, communicating that emotion, thinking it, would be relationally, culturally, or socially inappropriate according to the norms of, whatever situation you're in. Although people sometimes suppress positive emotions, so for example, if you're out to dinner and you're really excited about something and somebody else is clearly not in the mood, you might suppress to kind of keep that stuff away. Suppression more often occurs with negative emotions, especially anger and sadness. This is because displays of pleasant emotions typically tend to elicit favorable responses, whereas negative emotions drive other people away. That's not always true though, because for example, one thing I've noticed is that pride can be an emotion that people suppress. So if you, I don't know, get good news about a grade, or you get into a program that you were really excited about, or you ate really healthy that day, or I don't know, just something is going well, I do find that a lot of times people are afraid to brag on that because they're going to be perceived as narcissistic or conceited or stuck up. But the kind of person who is worried about bragging on themselves, coming across as conceited, is not the kind of person that has to worry about coming across as conceited. So one of the issues with suppression is a lot of times what we're doing is we're suppressing positive emotions that we should be practicing, like ginning up and drumming up to try to feel those a lot. Like we should feel pride and contentment and satisfaction and personal intelligence and self-worth, right? We should feel those things a lot. But a lot of times they'll sneak up on us, and we're afraid to display them outwardly because of what other people might think. And so we shove them back down. So suppressions can be problematic, I think, for positive emotions. So I don't necessarily agree with the theory that this is not a problem for positive emotions typically, because we do tend to live in a culture where people expressing pride about themselves and positivity can be regimented. So there's this thing called it's called like the crab mentality. So there's this legend that, and I think it's true, I think people have seen this happen, that when fishermen are catching crabs, they have to put them in a really tall pot because the crabs will jump into the pot, and once you get enough crabs in there, they'll instinctively know to pile up into a pile, and then as you know, new crabs top on top, eventually you get the pile tall enough that one of the crabs can jump out of the top. But what'll happen is occasionally, as the crabs are stacking up on top of each other in the top of the pot, trying to get to the top of the pot, which, you know, people who fish, professional fishers, they'll know how tall the pot is versus how many crabs you can stack, right? Occasionally you get a crab that scoots up the side of the pot, and the fish and the crabs in the center will actually grab the other crab by the leg and yank it back down into the pot. And so I've heard, I don't know if necessarily if this is true or if it's just like white people mythology, but that in traditional fishing villages, if a crab does manage to escape out of the side of these tall baskets or these tall pots, that the fisher people will let them, God, that sounds so weird, that the people who professionally fish will let them go because the crab is like magical, because they managed to somehow escape this crab mentality where you have to stack yourself in the center because it's the next person in line, right? You don't get to kind of succeed on your own. And I think that's a good metaphor for how a lot of times we think people are going to receive our positive emotions, which is why we suppress them. But suppression is very widely practiced as a strategy for managing unavoidable or unwanted negative emotions. But of course, its effectiveness is sort of marginal because you are trying to modify an intense arousal that you're already experiencing, or maybe you've been in a mood for 2 days. You don't want to try to manage the mood after it's sunk in. So the inverse of suppression, which is just kind of the pushing down of positive or negative emotions because you don't think that for some reason you're cautious about experiencing them outwardly to other people, is venting. Venting is allowing emotions to dominate your thoughts and then explosively expressing them. So essentially you're sort of fanning the flame of emotional arousal. So if suppression is dampening the flame, venting is fanning the flame. So venting could be positive, like when you jump up in for joy because you got I got a promotion or whatever. But nobody has a problem with that, right? That's just celebration. The issue is when you vent negative emotions, particularly anger, because it's not effective, because the venting can keep you in the cycle of focusing, right? In some ways you're actually reaffirming. So we think that when we talk about stuff a lot, it's going to get it out of our system. It depends. If as you're venting about it changes so that you can think about it in a different way, it might be helpful for emotional management. But more often than not, what happens is as we're venting, we just keep re-upping our investment in the slight, right? We keep thinking about the hurt. We keep revisiting the trauma. We keep revisiting the dramatic issue. And we're not getting any resolution. We're just reaffirming it in our mind, convincing ourselves that our anger is justified, right? So we're not looking at maybe how we misunderstood the situation or maybe how there are other perspectives. We're just continuing to think about how our perspective is right. The reason people think venting works is because eventually somebody like burns themselves out and then they're tired. So that does work, but it's not the venting that made you less angry. It's the fact that you used up so much emotional energy to do the venting that you just get exhausted and then you're too exhausted to worry as much about it anymore, because like we talked about, emotions are higher intensity states, so they can't last as long. And so if you're venting about an emotion, eventually you are going to burn out the emotion, but not because the venting has somehow gotten the bad out of you, but because you just got too tired. And so but once you like get some rest, the next time something shitty happens, you're going to start all over again, because all the venting did was continue to affirm that you were right and that your judgment of the situation was the best one, and that you should be angry and that you are entitled to all this anger. But then you eventually just got tired, but you never resolved or came up with another way of thinking about it. And so you just create a cycle where this is now all you're able to do. So first, let's talk about anger specifically before we finish the stuff on venting, because anger is like a unique emotion that I think is worth talking about. There's lots of emotions, but anger I find uniquely, first of all, unique because in terms of negative emotions, anger is the one that seems to give people the most trouble, and two, because anger is so much an effect of thoughts. It's so much that you think certain thoughts and then you interpret the arousal from those thoughts as anger, but anger is not real. Like, you have a choice about whether you experience anger. So anger is a negative emotion that occurs when you perceive that something that you were entitled to have, an important goal or something, was blocked or interrupted from you by the improper action of an external agent. So I'll say that again. Anger. It's a nanger. Negative anger, nanger. Anger is a negative emotion that occurs when you, one, believe you are entitled to something, right? You should get this goal. Two, that goal is interrupted or blocked. And three, it's interrupted or blocked by the improper action of an external agent. So in other words, I was supposed to get this promotion. That guy who didn't deserve it swooped in and stole it from under me. I'm angry because that shit should have been mine, and they didn't deserve it, right? So as the definition suggests, anger is almost always triggered by someone or something external to us and our perception that what they did is unfair. It requires entitlement, because something can't be unfair to you unless you thought that what was fair was you getting what you want. And that's where anger gets really tricky, because number one, you're rarely entitled to as much stuff as you think you're entitled to. And two, the explanation that you didn't get the thing you're supposed to get because someone else came and took it away from you or kept you from getting it is so clearly a fundamental attribution error, because there could be a million reasons why things didn't work out the way you want. And that is a moment where experiencing a much lower level state of emotion like disappointment, right? I wanted a thing. It would have been nice if I got the thing. I really, really wanted it. I didn't. It sucks, right? That's all there is to that particular experience. Turning it into anger, though, lets you blame somebody else for things not having gone wrong, instead of you having to think about, like, well, this was, never mine to begin with, and life is sometimes just random chance. Now, there is a study from 2004, there's a couple of them, that say that each of us experience anger quite frequently, that the average person is mildly to moderately angry anywhere from several times a day to several times a week. I just don't think that's true. I'm never angry, like rarely, except maybe at this study. Because I don't feel like entitled. Like, I don't wake up in the morning like, well, today's going to work out for me. People owe me shit. The world should just do what I say. Oh, that person stole that. Oh, that person got in my way. Oh, this thing didn't happen. Oh, that shouldn't have happened, right? So I don't feel anger because A, I don't feel the entitlement to get stuff. B, I don't explain things not working out for me as me perceiving. I don't explain things not working out for me as other people unfairly or improperly doing stuff, right? That perception, I've trained myself not to have that perception of things. I experience disappointment a lot. I experience frustration when I put in certain efforts and I don't get the outcomes I think the efforts should have warranted. I experience those emotions, but I don't experience anger, because to me, it seems like when you think about the definition of anger, there are so many steps in there: entitlement, attributing someone else's actions to the situation, assuming those actions were improper, assuming that what would have been fair is for you to get what you wanted, but not for them to get what they wanted. I mean, there's just so many thought errors and fundamental attribution biases in that list of behaviors, that why would anyone choose to experience anger? So again, if you believe anger is this automatic thing that just happens, then you're not going to agree with me, because anger is just this thing you feel. It's not a specific kind of set of thoughts that make you have particular reactions to situations. Okay. People often deal with anger by stewing on it, right? It was called rumination, thinking it over, suppression, which doesn't work, or venting to get the anger out. So venting, so this is back to venting, and then we'll wrap this up. The assumption that venting, right, so kind of like continually stewing on the anger out loud and explosively is going to rid you of the anger is rooted in this Greek concept called catharsis. And catharsis was this Greek concept of like expunging or purging the guilt or sadness or fear or whatever, right? It was this idea that you would let it out. So in classic Greek tragedy, there was a chorus, and the chorus's job was to process the emotions that the tragedy would gin up. So those emotions could be sadness, they could be violation, they could be, so if you think about Romeo and Juliet, right, there's a lot of just like unfairness and jealousy and frustration because the parents, are getting in the way of this true love kind of thing. Well, I guess it depends on if you read Romeo and Juliet as a satire or not, which I do, but let's suppose it's just a true love story, right? And then the chorus was there to help you process those emotions, and you were supposed to have left the Greek theater like feeling very like, oh, whew. But that's different. Like that kind of catharsis where a very carefully scripted narrative works through a set of complex emotions to help the audience kind of process it in a theatrical, dramatic, fictional way is very different than you continually to circle around in your own bag of shit because you're mad about something. That doesn't work. So there is some debate about whether like punching a pillow or whatever works. It depends. If you are a person who typically has not been taught that your anger is justified, yes, punching the pillow works for you because it helps you process, not vent out, but process the fact that you do have anger that you need to face. If you are a person who's already quick to anger, no, punching a pillow will not help because you're just continuing to sit there thinking it's unfair, right? The only thing that fixes this is you working through the definition of anger, right? Okay, right now I feel anger because one, I felt entitled to something. Okay, were you entitled to that thing? Are you entitled to a promotion? Are you entitled to a nicer office? Were you entitled to the parking space? I mean, whatever it was, right? Were you entitled for somebody to just stay with you for the rest of your life and commit to you and never break up with you? I mean, no, it would have been nice. You hope that's what's going to happen, but you're not entitled to it. Then, did the other person do it on purpose to fuck with you, right? And three, was it unfair or improper for them to have done it? No, they broke up with me, and it sucks. And I don't know that I like deserved the way it happened, and I tried really hard to be a good partner, but romance isn't a matter of entitlement. I just wanted the relationship. I liked being with the person. I'm used to them, if I'm being honest. And now they're not there anymore, and I'm disappointed, and it sucks. But anger is a choice, right? That comes through a series of specific things that you are thinking are true about a situation that are definitely your perception. Okay, so that's anger. So while venting does provide a temporary sense of pleasure because you feel righteous and validated, it boosts anger. So then there's this other thing, because not all of you experience anger. But if you don't experience anger, you do experience, I bet frequently, this other emotion, this emotion called anger light, that I call anger light. And I don't think we talk about it enough as a culture because we do tend to focus on anger so much, but really a lot of us don't feel anger because we don't feel entitlement a lot. And this is called resentment. And if you haven't experienced anger recently, I bet you'll recognize that you have experienced resentment, especially if you're a nice person or a people pleaser, if you identify that way. A lot of what's happening when people are people pleasing is they are being nice on the outside and saying yes when they want to say no or saying no, right? They're doing things they don't feel like doing, but then the inside, they're not being nice at all. Right? On the inside, they're talking shit, they're blaming people, right? That's resentment. So the definition of resentment is bitter indignation. And indignation is like, it's like baby entitlement, right? The bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly. So similar to anger, because there's this sense of unfairness, there's this sense of righteous injustice, there's this sense of like, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen, but it's all kind of toned down. That's why a lot of us feel resentment on so many levels, because since it's not a blown up gigantic emotion, it's a little bit of a more moderate emotion. We don't pay as much attention to it. It's also known as bitterness. And it is the basic foundation of hatred. It also involves some feelings of disgust, sadness, and surprise because you kind of have this perception that you have been wronged somehow. All right. Resentment also depends on the perception that someone was supposed to do something or you were supposed to get something you didn't get. I've heard resentment described as drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Because while you are on the outside acting as if everything's okay, unlike a person who has anger who doesn't, on the inside, you're essentially just keeping all of the anger inside while you pretend on the outside to be nice, right? That's kind of the key to resentment. Because if you were resentful on the outside, which you can be in passive aggressive ways, most people aren't comfortable doing that, so they keep the resentment inside. When you routinely practice, So when you routinely practice resentment, because I always have resentment a little bit. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like right now, I'm sitting here resentful about these videos. Why? Because, number one, I'm resentful that there isn't someone who is an interpersonal communication scholar who can write a decent book with a chapter on emotions that isn't totally not true, right? There's a lot of bad science around emotions out there that I just am not going to co-sign and have people read. And two, I'm resentful because students are always like, oh, I learned so much better from video. I'm a visual learner. I'm an oral learner. And so I'll put all this time into making these videos, and then they're like, oh, this is too long. Why can't we just have a reading? And I'm like, you just told me you didn't want the reading, and now you're telling me you don't want the video. But that resentment's all a choice. Right? It's my perception that I never do anything wrong, and I've done everything great, and other people need to fix their problems, and other people are getting in my way, and other people are unfair, and I'm perfectly reasonable. So again, it's anger light, because it's the same sense of that entitlement and that unfairness and that sense of injustice, but I don't let it go into emotional mood. It's just like I have this sort of momentary feeling of affect. My instinct is to call it resentment. I've learned to recognize that that's what comes up, so I practice thoughts. I like making these videos. Every time I make a video like this, it helps me process the ideas. I like that I'm giving you readings that I believe in. So there's all these reasons why I like doing them. And so I just have to remember that when my affective state wants me to think thoughts like resentment. When you routinely practice resentment, so I'm talking like when your dominant trait, like you go to resentment a lot to try to process negative emotions, that it becomes almost part of your self-concept, either for your ideal or actual self. We describe that condition of perpetual resentment as martyrdom. In theology and history, martyrs are specific historical figures who sacrifice themselves for like worthy causes, right, for social justice. Think of Joan of Arc, and then there's the self-immolating monk during the Vietnam War. We talk about making people martyrs because they're murdered or assassinated because of something they stand for. So Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, like it's debatable with people like Michael Brown, for example, or Eric Garner are martyrs. They have been martyred, but since they themselves did not die in pursuit of a specific cause, that's kind of like gray area. But generally speaking, martyrs sacrifice themselves for the greater good, right? The difference between those kinds of martyrs and interpersonal communication martyrs or martyrdom, because I don't know if you really want to call yourself, I'm a martyr. I don't think that that's good for you, but you can say like, I have habits of practicing martyrdom, right? I tend to have a lot of martyrdom in my communication. Your sense of sacrifice, you're like always being worn out and always doing what everyone else wants to do and always putting your stuff aside so other people can be happy. It doesn't come from a place of acceptance and empowerment and working toward change. It comes from a place of you being not brave enough to tell people like, I just don't want to do this. Right? You're afraid of what people are going to say or do or think about you if you stand up for yourself. So you just keep continuing to do things you don't want to do and then making yourself, and then of course like your brain's like, why are we doing all this stuff we don't want to do? This doesn't make any sense, right? So you explain it to yourself by being like, well, because I'm self-sacrificing. If I don't do it, no one else would do it. If I didn't do it, it wouldn't get done. And people just don't appreciate me. And you start to feel a kind of pleasure because you're so put upon and you're so stressed and you do everything for everyone else. And so you start to become kind of proud of the fact that you suffer the most. And that's really, really addictive to be the person who suffers the most. It's just like anger. If you practice it enough, it becomes a very addictive feeling and the thoughts trigger a really positive, not in the sense of like effective, but in the sense of you get rewarded with your body flooding itself with all kinds of chemicals to reward that behavior because it's now become a habit. So whenever you're stressed out about like, why am I staying up to edit someone else's paper when mine's not done? Your brain starts to send up dopamine and neurotransmitters to try to get you to keep making the decision you've already made. So you get this feeling, and the feeling is must people please, and then you feel the resentment, and you get a flood of dopamine as you're rewarded for feeling the resentment. You got to work really hard to break that cycle, okay? Because being resentful all the time and being angry are two very shitty ways to live your life. So 4 characteristics of martyred communication, and then I believe after this, we are done. Yep, so 4 characteristics of martyred communication. 1, victim mentality. You see or describe yourself as a victim. Although you may have endured some bad relationships or bad experiences where people were in fact jerks, you don't own how you create or promote or allow these outcomes, right? So bad stuff might have happened, but you don't own how you now have a choice to not repeat those cycles. It feels inevitable that just like, oh, my life has always sucked, it'll just keep sucking. You have a hard time owning your role in problems when you discuss them, rather than saying, next time I am going to blank, right? Owning your role and what you can do, you say, oh, they should have done it differently, or they're going to have to change, or why should I have to change? You reject or refuse to look for solutions. So if someone, if you're complaining to someone and they offer you a suggestion, your first instinct is to just reject it, right? It's not going to work. I don't have time for that, whatever. Following this, you might find that you rationalize or justify why you must continue to behave in the way you're behaving. I got to keep working on this person's paper because if I don't, then blah, 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 right? Like, I'm looking at you going, you don't have to do other people's homework. You don't have to give other people your notes. You don't have to stay up with people while you're tired. I mean, these are all choices you make and they are optional. And you're looking at me going, oh, but I have to do those things, right? That's a really good sign that you've got some martyrdom communication going on. You also may behave as if you're trapped, even when some of your problems have obvious solutions. Trapped people often fluctuate between acting helpless and lashing out. So sometimes anger and martyrdom can work together because when you're being a martyr, you're repressing your feelings, you're acting in resentment, and eventually it gets too much, so you get angry. And then you feel bad you got angry, and you go back to resentment. So when we get to the unit on conflict styles, that's called the reactive conflict sequence, and it's a combination of anger and martyrdom. All right, so sign number 1, victim mentality. Sign 2, rejecting possible solutions. Sign 3, you communicate with people who can't make changes. We call these non-agential communicators. They're communicators who don't have agency. So you and your romantic partner are having trouble. You talk to everyone about your romantic partner, and you tell yourself, oh, they won't listen to me, or, oh, well, you know, they don't want to hear what I have to say. I mean, in reality, what you're doing is you're rejecting solutions because you're going to people who can't fix the problem to solve a problem. And then 4th, you seek a change in circumstance, not a change in perception. So instead of changing how you think about things, you want other people to change, you want the situation to change. All right, so that's resentment. So if suppression and venting and anger and resentment and martyrdom are not good strategies for emotional management, what is? So I have 2 suggestions here, and they're pretty short because really the best solution for all this is your CTFAR and ABCDE models, right? Working those models repeatedly around a specific problem. Like if you practice resentment a lot, resentment goes into the T and the F line of your CTFAR model. Working on describing the circumstance, working on thinking through the actions, thinking about alternate thoughts, that's really going to be your key to kind of starting to work through some of this. But one feeling you can start to feel more often is acceptance. Like managing emotions, acceptance is great. Allowing emotions to naturally arise without trying to dampen them or trying to heighten them up. Acknowledging that negative emotions and positive emotions are just part of the human behavior. That if you have emotions going on right now you don't love, you have options, you can have different emotions. Not every emotion is an emotion. Some emotions are just thought feelings. Not every feeling is inevitable. You can choose different thoughts, right? Research suggests that people who have the ability to engage in acceptance have better psychological health outcomes, including less brooding, and it's kind of like stewing over a problem, less brooding, lower anxiety, and they have less negative emotion in response to stress. So acceptance is a mood state, right? It's created by thought feelings, and if you hold on to it and you practice it a lot, it's a good place to be. It can be a mood state that you default to very often, even when you're having a negative mood state to go with it. If you're grouchy, if you're exhausted, if you feel overwhelmed, if you feel frustrated, you can go, okay, well, I accept that this is where I am right now. I'm not going to try to like artificially heighten it up, and I'm certainly not going to make a bigger deal out of it than it is. So I have to be bored later because it's the end of the night and there's nothing on TV. I'm just going to accept that I'm bored. I'm not going to try to like gin up interest or make boredom out to be the worst thing in the world. I'm just going to accept that that's where I am right now. There's also this shorthand process that I think, like, if you're in a real pinch, this is a really easy way to work on changing emotional management, and it's called reappraisal. So while your CTFAR and ABCDE models are your best steps, they're longer. They require a little bit more effort, but the reappraisal you can do them pretty fast. It's 2 steps, and they have to go in this order, so you can't flip them. First, before or like at the start of an encounter where you suspect it'll trigger an undesired emotion, or you kind of have been through this before and you know it always doesn't go well for you, call to mind the positive aspects of the encounter, right? Of the event that might make you upset. If you truly can't think of anything positive about whatever's happening, the person, the relationship, whatever, focus on like, one positive thing that could happen out of this is I could practice being the kind of person who doesn't just feel an emotion because I thought it. Like I can be the kind of person who gets to choose how I react to things. I don't have to just do whatever my brain tells me to do, right? Or I can be the kind of person who can have a perfectly decent conversation with someone that I don't like. So that's the positive aspects of the encounter. And this is really hard to do. I mean, nobody wants to go into a shitty situation and be like, well, this is an opportunity for me to get used to dealing with shitty situations. But if you can't come up with anything else, that is a shortcut. Then once you have called to mind what potentially positive aspects there are of the encounter, consider the short and long-term consequences of your actions. So if you withdraw right now, if you hide, if you refuse to talk to this person, what are the short-term and long-term consequences? So in the immediate, you'll get some relief, but in the long term, you're probably going to make the problem worse. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes withdrawal is fine. It just sort of depends. If I lash out right now and quit my job, short, long-term consequences. So it's real fast. It's, okay, is there anything positive that I can just right now, like, I know this sucks, but here are some good things about it. And I will say there's always something that you can learn from I mean, I had to have a root canal once with no Novocaine. And it hurt like a son of a bitch for minutes. And the only thing I could think of was like, the positive to this is I'm going to take really fucking good care of my teeth because I'm going to remember this and I don't ever want to have to do this again, right? That comes with practice. Then you think about the short and long-term consequences of your actions. So while I'm in the middle of the root canal and I'm feeling this intense pain and I'm drumming it up in my head, right? I'm not just like letting the pain happen. I'm just like, okay, I could just stop right now. I could leave and then have to come back and do all of this again when I'm so close. This time I would get the Novocaine, so that'd be nice, but then I have to, so like that would be the short-term, long-term consequences. And almost always the short term is I get relief because I'm going to do the easy thing. Could be blowing up angry, could be leaving, could be spending the money, could be eating the food, could be smoking the cigarette, right? Could be cheating on your partner, could be yelling, could be quitting the class, could be not doing the homework, right? That's always, the short-term consequence is always good. It's like I get relief. But it's it's bringing to mind those long-term consequences that you're trading for the short term it's really challenging. And psychologists have a concept for this. They call it future discounting. So our brain perceives the value of an immediate reward, like avoiding having to do my homework, more importantly than the benefit of a long-term reward, like getting my degree. But that is a default habit that you can change if you practice reappraisal. You can also use reappraisal to effectively address positive emotional arousal. So like, let's suppose you get a job offer from a company and you really want to work for it, but your roommate like hasn't gotten a single interview. Obviously, this is a case where rather than suppressing your joy, which teaches you you're not allowed to be proud of yourself because other people's feelings might get hurt, which we do not want to reinforce, you can think to yourself like, okay, this is an opportunity for me to be there for my friend, right? To put my stuff aside for the moment so I can be there for them. It's a chance for me to practice disciplining my emotions for an outcome that I want. Short-term consequences are I don't get to brag on myself. Long-term consequences are I will have a chance to celebrate when I feel much better because I won't feel like my friend is being devalued, right? So you can then use that as a way to get yourself in the mood to go to your friend like, oh, well, I actually, I did get an offer, but I don't want that to make you feel bad because it just goes to show that certain things I've done have worked and now I can teach you those things or whatever. So you can use it for positive emotions, but again, it's one of those situations where I'm not sure how often somebody needs to use reappraisal for positive emotions, but if you are experiencing a positive emotion that you really want to communicate because you want it to be an emotion and you want to hold on to it, and you think displaying it in the moment might have some repercussions, think first of all about whether that's true, right? Because part of it could be that you just have been trained not to brag on yourself, but there's no reason why if in the middle of a class, there's really no reason why in the middle of the class you shouldn't raise your hand while you're having discussion and it's related and go, guess what, I have some good news, right? There's really no reason that you shouldn't do that. It's not going to bother anybody and you get a chance to share your news, but people just don't do it. But if you are going to if you do choose that a certain positive emotion is something you don't want to communicate at this time, one option is to communicate it to yourself by telling yourself the story again or writing it down. And the other option is to use reappraisal, because I'd rather you use reappraisal to reframe delaying you sharing your positive results Then suppression, which means I just can't do this right now because people won't like it and I'll be bad and all that stuff. Okay, so that is emotional management and emotional intelligence, and that wraps up the emotion and empathy series, 2 videos, and I will see you later. Bye.